You're watching WCCA TV 13, the People's Channel, and this is Sunshine Week. Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis said, if the broad light of day could be let in on men's actions, it would purify them as the sun disinfects. This is Sunshine Week. It's a nationwide initiative around open government, transparency, and freedom of information. Transparency is what we call open government and access to what the government is doing for us. Why is this important? Why is transparency important? How are we doing with transparency in Worcester? That's why we're doing this show today, and that's what we're going to ask of our panel. Our panel today includes Thomas Caywood of the Telegram and Gazette, Jeremy Shulkin of Worcester Magazine, Kevin Ksen, private citizen and activist, and Mauro DePasquale of Channel 13. Thanks for being on the show today, guys.
Thank you. Sure.
So I want to start off by asking you about why transparency is important. Like, why would anybody besides a gadfly care about this stuff? I have my opinions about this, but I wonder what you think. Tom, what do you think?
I mean, it's central to democracy. Like, the whole idea of democracy is government by the people, for the people. And the information that they gather at City Hall or at the police department or inspectional services, like, that's all done, funded by us, on our behalf, and that information belongs to us. And if you don't have free, open access to government information, then you don't have an informed citizenry, and the whole thing, in my opinion, it doesn't work, democracy, if people aren't able to know what their government is doing in their name.
You have trouble making decisions because you don't have the information, and then you also have trouble, I think you have trouble with accountability too.
Yeah.
It seems to me like a lot of times our elected leaders or our government officials are hoping for a sort of a moral accountability. They say, listen, you know me, I'm a nice guy, I'm here doing my work, I'm a committed citizen, I'm a great dad, I coach Little League. Like, I'm not doing anything fishy. You don't need access to all these records. If you needed the information, I would give it to you. And sometimes that could work, and sometimes that couldn't work. And I
don't care for that idea at all. It reminds me of when they were doing the nuclear treaties with the Soviets, where it was the trust but verified.
Right.
Yes.
I'm not saying that government officials aren't trustworthy. Some are, some aren't. But you can't. It's not. Take my word for it. That's not the way it works.
Go back to sleep, everything is okay.
I wanted to ask you people about their experiences then trying to interface with the city of Worcester, trying to get information to help people make better decisions, and just trying to get information to get a better picture of what our local government's doing. Kevin, and you, just as a private citizen, have actually filed information requests with the city.
Yeah, I think the big one for me that's tangible was around the Save Our Pools effort.
Okay.
So it was a 2-month effort on my part, and then with others, to get the city to release the reports they had on the aquatics reports and what they were considering doing, what the research had shown around the existing pools. And it was without that, the committee wasn't part of the conversation. There was this background planning document and background conversations happening about, should we get rid of the pool? Should we build one big, large Olympic-sized pool and charge money for it? Should we do 2 pools, 3 pools? We weren't even part of the conversation because we had never seen the report. And then it took 2 months once we found out about the report to get it released to the public, which is just crazy.
So that was the sort of thing where we're getting that information suddenly made a conversation happen.
It changed the whole game. It changed the whole conversation in Worcester. Totally different conversation after that.
Mauro, have you had experiences with this sort of thing?
Well, yeah, actually, I have. And just to further what Tom had mentioned, it's about citizen empowerment. When we're talking about transparency, it's not just about seeing the information the government wants you to see. It's about getting the information you need. And I think the government, as a group that works for us, they're accountable to us, and they need to give us that information. They should be anticipating with that information. They should approach it as if they're on our side from the beginning.
There's a customer service
Shouldn't
kind of a
be
thing.
against you, or So yeah, we've seen that. When we went through cable hearings, we used to see sort of like a reluctance to give up the information, or there was a tendency to almost like cover over the information. I was mentioning it to Kevin. You might have been there at some of the meetings we had,
Sure.
where they would read from their agenda and go, okay, let's look at item 1. What do you think of that, folks? Everybody vote. So the only ones voting on it even is the committee, and not the people that are at the table, the stakeholders who need the information, who want to participate. So for me, when I think of transparency, it's about getting access to the information and also contributing to that information and making sure we can do it. And I think there are ways to do it that would be no further burden to the additional budgets that the city has, and we can foster new partnerships and find ways to do it without detriment to the administration and to the the economy, if you will, of the way the city does business. I think it can just be more open and inclusive, and give people a chance to participate from the ground up, from the deliberation process. I think we should be, the people, when I say we, the people should be involved from the process, deliberation, all the way through in the process. And I don't see that as being, I don't see our democracy working as strong as it could in that area.
Yes, as far as encouraging people in different stages of the process.
Right.
Yeah, it can be hard to get involved.
It sure is. And that's why we pay people to run, to be in the government, so they can do it for us.
Yeah.
We forget that sometimes.
Well, I want to ask Jeremy, now you were a writer for Worcester magazine, a journalist in the city. So you sort of, I guess, have a professional interest in transparency in government. I think that Worcester has done a lot of things to have an open and transparent government, right? When we have our city's checkbook has famously gone on the website. The website has a tremendous number of minutes and things and agendas and all sorts of things. We even have some archives of videos of past city meetings on our city's website. So from a layman's point of view, somebody like me who doesn't really interact with this transparency part of the process, I think, okay, things are fine. What's your perspective as somebody who's actually had to make these calls and fill out this paperwork and try to get this information?
I think that those steps that they took were huge. The checkbook thing in itself is something to really be proud of. I think that it's the city, though, there's not like a uniform way of handling these things, which is something that one of the things we're trying to push for. An example is individual department heads who I've requested things for or from. Some of them have been super responsive. I mean, I don't even have to fill anything out. I can call them and say, I'm looking for this document, and they'll send it right over through email. No questions asked, no problem. Then there are other times where you have to go through the motions and the paperwork, and there are all these phone calls back and forth, and sort of, why do you want this, or what are you looking for, or blah, 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 and that sort of makes the process a little more bogged down and more difficult. So we're trying to get like a uniform way to handle these things, and that's sort of one of our requests, is to get this point person in there to just sort of kick your request to them, and they do all the legwork through the city departments and get it back to you without sort of any interference in between. I think that I sort of had a point there, but now it's gone. But I think that's sort of what we're going for, is a way to streamline it and to make it something where it's easier for anybody, not someone who, I have the advantage of knowing some of the laws around this stuff. It's easy for me to whip up a records request if I just sit down and have the time to do it. For someone who's just walking in, someone from maybe they're starting out at a nonprofit and want to get some information, data that the city has, it's a lot harder for them to figure out who to go to and where to go to get that.
To navigate the process.
Exactly. And I think it's worth keeping in mind that the city government, not to mention state and federal government, generates tens of, or even hundreds of thousands of pages of audits and oversight reports and financial data and anything that isn't out there. And they're not hiding it; it's just not publicized.
Yeah.
And all they have important information there. Audits talk about where there are shortfalls or where there are problems or issues or what's working well. Financial data is the nuts and bolts of city government, how much money we have to spend or don't have to spend. And that's important stuff that people should be wanting to see, just even if it's not in the newspaper.
I wanted to ask Tom about this too, because Tom, you write for the Telegram and Gazette. You've also written for different papers around the country, is that right?
Yeah.
Worked different places. What's been your experience working with the city of Worcester?
I have to say, on the whole, this is one of the more challenging places I've ever worked in terms of getting access to public records. And which surprises me, because I've worked in some small towns, and I mentioned to you earlier that I worked down in Louisiana. You would think that would be more difficult, but I'm with Jeremy. It's mixed, and there are certain people, certain departments that it's very easy. Amanda Wilson at Inspectional Services, you call up and say, I'm looking into this alleged slumlord. Like, I want to see the code violations for these 10 addresses. No questions asked, she'll get that together, often has to do a lot of work herself, and she doesn't say, oh, you can't see that, or but I think in that case it sort of serves her end, like she's running around trying to get people to bring their houses, their rental properties up to code. And so if we're going to write about somebody that's not doing it, that benefits her. But then you get a different response if you say you want something out of the police department about an internal affairs investigation against one of their officers. That does not serve their end. They don't want to be, if an officer did something wrong, perhaps they don't want that aired in the newspaper. And so you get a whole different response, which is like, no, you can't have that. And then, you have to have a lot of fights. And also what Jeremy said, like, I don't see how the regular citizen has a chance, because for us, I do this all the time. I know the law. I know how to, bird dog it. I have the trumpet of the paper. If it comes down to it, I'll start writing about them withholding public records. But like the average citizen, like I just can't imagine how they could possibly wrestle some of this stuff free on their own. And we don't have any rights that that you don't have. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, there is not some special public records law for the press. Anybody should be able to get anything that I can get. But I wonder about that. And I mean, the other thing I wanted to say about it is they're breaking the law. Like, it's a law. Like, the city council passes ordinance, and there are laws that we all have to obey and that are enforced by the police. And when they do not release public records, or they don't handle the requests right, that is a law. The state public records law is a law. And so it astonishes me when I see the city breaking the law, and I have to like shame them into complying with the law. And I think any resident should be disturbed by that.
And there's little in the way of actual punishment or consequence for municipalities or towns or whatever that don't follow through with either federal law or state law, or even, well, I guess it would be state law. So there's not much incentive there. I mean, you can shame them through, your media outlet, but for an individual, I mean, you're essentially, if you hit a brick wall, you can't go around it.
I mean, the law says that there are fines for arbitrary and capricious withholding of public records, but there's not much evidence of like people being able to get that finding, because like usually it's just ignorance, like they didn't know it was a public record, or but yeah, there's not much teeth in it. And what's worse is the Secretary of State has a public records division that you can appeal a denial to or a lack of action, and we do that all the time. And 5 weeks later you get a letter saying it's been assigned to this attorney, and they call the city or whoever, the state agency, and then they try to broker some sort of understanding, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. And then if they don't respond to that, then they're supposed to refer it to the Attorney General's office for prosecution. Almost never happens. Can you think of an example of
I've never had good luck even getting something like that overturned or more info squeezed out.
Not just the current Attorney General, but like I think that their feeling is that Telegram and Gazette has lawyers. Let them go
litigate
to court
it,
and litigate it, exactly, which is what we have to do a lot of times. And we've spent a small fortune a couple of years ago in a big case that went on for 2 years. But why shouldn't the Attorney General enforce the law in the state of Massachusetts? Why should that be left up to a corporation to litigate that? Like I don't think that's adequate.
That's a problem also for citizen journalists. If they're going to go out, like we have kids that are doing the news, and community members that are creating their own news, or what you do, Kevin. You don't have that power, the corporate power behind you to go after somebody for that, and you're denied. I thought under the law, the Freedom of Information, you really don't even need a reason to ask. You should be able just to ask. And I want A, B, and C, and that's it. You don't really need to explain why.
It can be confusing. We always say FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, but that's federal. And for state and city records, it's the PRL, the Public Records Law. But you don't have to. We just, in our story on Sunday for Sunshine Week about police logs, like that came up. We went into police stations just as regular people, not wearing our, and asked for the police log, and we got a lot of, why do you want to see that? And that question is prohibited. They can't ask for your identity, and they can't ask why you want it, except for there's one exception to that, which is if you want blueprints of like a state building or security procedures, things like that could be, they could have some terrorism related thing. Other than that, like a police log or whatever, they're not supposed to ask you why you want it or who you are, but they do all the time.
Well, I want to turn our front upside down and say, despite the fact that this stuff is super frustrating, people are working on it. Despite the fact that the city has done some stuff and yet has a lot of progress to make, people are pushing that progress forward. And this week at the city council meeting, actually, local people are bringing 4 petitions in front of the city council around transparency in government. One of them says, Worcester should have a public records and data retention policy regarding the use and preservation of social media. I love this one especially because people just love talking about social media. It's a real buzzword thing. The second one is, video recorded of public meetings should be made and distributed in a format that's more easily viewed and shared. One of these is, the third one, we request that the city manager designate a staff member as the point person for all public records requests. And the fourth one would be request the City Council support the passage of state legislation to promote freedom of information, open government, accessible public records, including measures to minimize the cost of accessing public records, and improve the use of information technology to make government information publicly accessible. So these are the four items. One of these involves basically asking the state legislature to take some kind of action, or for the City Council to just in some sort of indirect way come out as saying, yeah, it would be great to have more transparency on the state level. The other three are very interesting. Kevin, can you talk about the social media?
I think the social media one's important because this is the direction we're all going in. So everything's becoming more and more digitalized. Our communication is happening in far more different ways today than it did 5 years ago.
And so by social media, we're talking about Twitter, we're talking about Facebook, we're talking about
instant messaging.
We're talking about all these kinds of communication, which, I talked to one city councilor about this. He said, well, is my personal Twitter account under open records law? And I said, I don't know, but I know that the police have an official Twitter account, the police have a Facebook page, plenty of city departments, and the city has Twitter and Facebook and all these things. And these are methods of communication, and people are posting comments on there, and there's a lot of back and forth going on, and sometimes these things are vanishing. Sometimes even press releases are vanishing from the city's website. And the question is, when people are pushing paper in other ways and sending each other's emails and sending each other memos, those things stick around. Those things get archived, so somebody can say, "Hey, tell me about what's been going on with this stuff. What are the official conversations?" And I guess the question is, are these Facebook things getting archived?
I think that's exactly the question. I think that's the one we're trying to put on the table. This is probably one we don't really have an answer to. We haven't heard back. We've made an inquiry with the city government and haven't heard back from Worcester in terms of what is happening. Is there a policy in place right now? So the assumption is there isn't, and so we'd like to see one. This stuff needs to get archived, it needs to be retained, and then made available if folks ask for it.
And so basically this would be to say that stuff that the city's communicating via Facebook should be covered by the same procedures as stuff that the city's communicating any other way.
Exactly, and it goes to the root of Sunshine Week, that part of why we're doing this is to create this conversation and this climate in the city so that people recognize, oh, public records are important, we need to pay attention. And so this needs to be on everybody's radar screen, whether it's the secretary at DPW that's posting something on the DPW Facebook page, or the chief posting on the city's police department's Facebook page.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the counselor who doesn't know the answer to your question about can I be using my personal email should feel like he or she needs to be finding that question out. So it shouldn't be like, oh, I don't know, and then forgets about it.
This person was not asking me, I hope, because I don't know anything about the law of this stuff.
But he or she needs to ask somebody now, because it's a question that's important.
Maybe there's a question. I wanted to ask Jeremy, you are actually the person who is presenting the petition to the city council saying, can you designate a staff member or a point person for public records requests? And you were talking a little bit about this earlier, the confusion that sometimes reigns.
Yeah, I think, you have, in a government even the size of Worcester's, and I mean even in larger cities, you have so many various people who are clued into different things. You have Worcester, I don't know how many departments it has, but it has a lot, from Health and Human Services, which is an umbrella for even more departments, to the police, to Public Works. There are just various departments and people who are in charge of things. And if you don't know who to send your request to, then you're never going to get your answer. And sometimes it's sort of a maze of, there's so many overlapping things, and you want to make sure not only that your request is phrased the right way, but it gets to the right person. Right. And I think it would be beneficial for the city too to have someone who knows all this stuff. So if I am sending a request to David Moore, who's the legal guy, and then the same day Tim McGorthy, who's economic development, gets a request too, and they might be very responsive, and I might get what I need even that same day. But you would hope that sort of the people in charge of city government sort of know what's being sought after too. And on the one hand, it makes things smooth for them on their end, sort of knowing what's going on in the way that city government's working. But they also might start to tailor what kind of more information they release publicly. You know, if a lot of people are looking for X information, then at the next city council meeting, they might do a little more to promote, here's more information about.
That there'd be somebody who'd be saying, listen, every month we're getting a request for this kind of stuff. Can we just put this on the website?
Exactly. You know, you have the police department, it's starting to put their crimes online, crime
they have a
mapping,
map.
right? And I think that if you didn't have pressure for this from neighborhood watch groups or crime watch groups, they probably wouldn't do it because it wouldn't occur to them that this is something citizens want to see.
Yeah. Those crime maps are incredible. So I can talk about the one that is my personal obsession, which is video recorded at public meetings should be made and distributed in a format more easily viewed and shared. A few years ago, back when the city was taping the meetings but not putting them online, I tried to buy DVDs of the city's meetings so that I could then rip them and put them on the Internet Archive, which is a sort of a non-profit YouTube. And they wouldn't sell these DVDs to me because they knew that I was going to put these online. And so then I put it, actually, maybe the only request I ever put into the city, I was put a request in with the law department saying like, so like, he's copyright or what is the story with these? Like can you tell me, can you clarify me the rights around these videos? Assuming I can eventually buy these, is it okay to put these online? The law department didn't get back to me. I called them up, I said, no, seriously, what's the story? And they're like, we'll get back to you, we'll get back to you. Then you get back to me. So finally we just started putting these things online. And it took about an hour of time a week and about $1 to buy a blank DVD every week. We basically just had a DVD recorder hooked up to a TV, tuned into channel 12, or channel 12 that shows all the meetings. We would record the DVD, stick it in the computer, pull the recording off the computer, upload it to the archive, type in the date of the meeting, put it up on a blog. We're done. $1 a week. Their goal is to archive all digital information for the next 10,000 years. They're very well funded. Great. $1 and 1 hour of person time a week. Now the city finally does this. Like just as we were getting ready to stop doing this because like it was just time to move on to other projects, I guess. The city started putting these meetings online, which is fantastic. But the problem is, of course, technical problems. They use Silverlight instead of Flash or some other video format. So can you look at these videos on an iPad? No. Well, who owns an iPad? Nobody owns these kinds of newfangled gadgets, right? No, this is like the future, but like the technology is stuck in the past. Mm-hmm. They record the meetings now using high definition video. The videos online aren't even standard definition. They're half standard definition. Like, is that Connie Lukes or Mike Germain? I can't even tell, right? Can you download these videos to make your own video? No. Can you share these videos easily on Facebook? No. Can you share these videos equally on Twitter? No. None of these things. Can you embed this video on your blog so that you can comment about it? No. And especially, can you download it so that you can cut out the piece that you care about? Or can you embed it on your blog, forwarded to the piece that you care about in a 3-hour meeting and say, people in my neighborhood, watch at this minute? No, you can't do any of these. And this is just technical stuff. Like, I care about technical stuff, so to me this seems like this incredible, grand, important thing. But this is honestly like a few hours of work for somebody, right? This isn't like a big deal. This is just like a problem that needs to get fixed. So, as you can tell, all this other stuff is like, sounds great to me, but this video stuff is close to my heart. So I'm going to be presenting that one.
So let me comment on that a little bit with you,
Yeah.
because I remember when you were doing that over here.
Yeah,
And
we were doing the video with WC.
And you make the point.
with
This is
WCCA.
why I say earlier that there has to be more involvement from the beginning in the process all the way through deliberation.
Right.
Because you're looking at, for example, those cameras in that studio, high-def cameras, and they're very expensive. They're much more expensive than the stuff we're using right here at the station right now. And then for them to use that and then to put it online, and you're getting a less than standard definition where you can't even see who's who on there, is actually absolutely ridiculous. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of time.
Well,
So you have to be, I think, critical about this. I think it's great that they're doing the work, and it's to their credit that they're doing this. But I think if there is really more transparency, there's more involvement to get it done and to get it done right from the beginning.
Yes, and this is the kind of thing where there's people, again, I don't know. It would be easy to nitpick things and say this or that is a problem with the city, but these are things that people actually care about. In this case, there's one person, maybe in the whole city, who cares about it, but there's a person who cares about it. I think all of these other things, it's nice that these initiatives are being put forth by individual citizens, because it shows, there's somebody who cares enough about this to make this happen. And hopefully this is the kind of thing which, increases accountability in the government, maybe increases people's feelings of legitimacy in the government a little bit. In this day and age, there's a lot of concerns about, a lot of people, everybody hates Congress, everybody hates the government on the left or on the right. A lot of concerns with legitimacy. Everybody feels like everybody in the government is crooks. And so I understand why whenever people come out and say, we want more transparency, people in government feel like, you already all think we're crooks, and now you're telling us more. Now you're like putting us in jail somehow by like making us show you all of these records. But I think it's really just the opposite. It's saying people are going to think you're crooks unless they know what's going on. You know, the more transparent you are, like the more people can look at that information and say, yeah, there's really not any sort of massive crime going on here. Right. There's not even a lot of irregularities going on here.
I send a lot of public records requests and get back a big packet and go through it and go, it's fine. You know, like I just curious, you know, fishing we call that, just checking to see what's going on. And you know, you only see the stories in the paper where there was something worth writing about, but I'm sure Jeremy has too. I've gotten public records and been through them, and that's it.
I think it's too often framed as this is a media versus government thing, and that people are looking for dirt when they file a records request. And I think I don't know the numbers for sure, but I'd guess that if you rounded up 10 people who file records requests or Freedom of Information Act requests, often you'll find half the time they're just looking for either statistics to confirm something that they're working on, whether they're for a lobby group or a nonprofit or just a neighborhood group, or they're just looking for basic government information like salary levels or things like that. You know, it's not necessarily I'm going to go rake up some muck by filing this report.
Well, let's not forget, when somebody goes to the police department and requests a copy of their report from an accident, it's the exact same law governing that. So our ability to get the copy of an accident report is the same law governing our ability to get any of these other reports or documents we're taking. So if we include that in, the vast number of public records requests are much more mundane and something like that.
Yeah, I think in my experience in Worcester in particular, I think it's gotten better, in the 5 years that I've been at the TNG, but at first it was like, why do you want all this stuff? And it was like a lot of pushback and just blank expressions sometimes. And I think we're sort of training them to be used to these requests coming. And City Hall is very used to it. Other agencies, but for the kind of point person that Jeremy was talking about, like that might help. The problem is like a culture of I have nothing against government. Both my parents were federal government employees. I grew up in DC. But it can be a culture of like, my job is to safeguard this information entrusted to me from nosy people or people that have no business seeing this. And like, that's the exact wrong attitude. The attitude, and the law says that everything is presumed to be a public record unless it meets one of these, 7 or 9 exemptions, whatever we're up to now. But what I see in practice is the opposite, is like, well, we can't give that to you unless we can establish for sure that you're allowed to have that, and it gets frustrating. But if you had somebody that was well versed in the public records law, so, say sleepy, agency X gets a public records request, and they're not used to dealing with that, they pass it on to this person. They say, oh yeah, you have to. I love when I send a records request and they pass it on to a private lawyer, because it's, I did that with Worcester State. I was seeking a video from their security camera, and they passed it on to a lawyer in Boston, and the lawyer said, yeah, you got to give that to him. And I had it like a week later, as opposed to 6 months of arguing with somebody.
I can imagine. We gotta wrap things up. We gotta wrap things up on our show. I want to thank our guests, Thomas Caywood of the Telegram and Gazette, Jeremy Shulkin of Worcester Magazine, Kevin Ksen, Public Citizen, Mauro DePasquale of WCCA TV 13. I am Mike Benedetti of the City of Worcester. Thanks for watching this show. Talk to you later on.